There's no doubt about the fact that Canada is in a not so good place right now. We have the real opportunity with our land, with our people, with our natural resources, our minerals, to do greatness.
On several occasions, I hear Alberta speaking and I'm just, okay, I actually think the same.
Working together to separate. The leader of the Parti Québécois here in Alberta on ways our province can work with Quebec on leaving Canada.
What happens when the foundation of a country begins to crack? What if those cracks widen into fractures so deep that the entire nation is at risk of breaking apart? And what if the people leading this push aren't fringe activists, but premiers, legislators, and ordinary citizens who feel betrayed by the very government meant to protect them? This isn't a thought experiment. It's the reality unfolding in Canada's western provinces right now. For decades, Canadians have been told that their country is built on unity: 10 provinces and 3 territories bound together under one flag, sharing resources, responsibilities, and a common destiny. But in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even parts of British Columbia, many people no longer believe that unity exists. They see Ottawa as a central authority that taxes their industries, blocks their pipelines, and ignores their voices. And they're done waiting for change, from cracks to chasms. For years, there were warnings. Small groups murmured about independence. Farmers grumbled about regulations. Oil workers cursed when projects were shut down. Politicians in Ottawa would promise to listen, then turn around and tighten the leash. But now, the whispers have grown into open defiance. The cracks in Canada's unity are no longer subtle lines. They are wide, undeniable CHAs MS. Frustration in the West has boiled over into something bigger than politics. It's not just about taxes or policies anymore. It's about survival, identity, and trust. Families that once saw themselves proudly as Canadians now question what that even means. They look at Ottawa and see a government that treats them like a colony, useful only for resources and revenue, but dismissed when it comes to respect and decision-making. Sovereignty on the table. Lenter Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta. Unlike leaders of the past who spoke cautiously about autonomy, Smith is saying the quiet part out loud. She's openly placing sovereignty on the table, not as a fantasy, but as a policy discussion. Panels are being held, petitions are being signed, and referendums are being prepared. This isn't fringe Facebook chatter. This is the Premier of Alberta, one of the richest provinces in Canada, suggesting that separation could one day be put to a vote. Think about that for a moment. A referendum asking Albertans whether they want to remain part of Canada or become a sovereign nation could soon appear on ballots. That's not politics, as usual. That's the kind of decision that reshapes nations. And it's not just Alberta. Saskatchewan, too, has grown tired of Ottawa's chokehold. In small towns and farmlands, the talk of sovereignty is spreading like wildfire. Even in British Columbia, where the politics are usually different, some communities are finding common cause with their prairie neighbors. The idea of breaking away from Ottawa is no longer unthinkably, it's becoming mainstream. The Ottawa betrayal. Why is this moment different from the years of frustration that came before? The answer lies in a string of betrayals, both real and perceived. Billions of dollars in oil and gas investment have left for the United States because projects in Canada are endlessly stalled or cancelled. Pipelines that could have transformed the economy were blocked, sometimes after years of work and billions already spent. Families that depended on these industries have watched their towns hollow out. Meanwhile, Ottawa doubled down with new taxes, carbon policies, and endless promises that never materialized. For many in the West, it feels intentional. They see leaders who lecture them about climate change at international summits, while ignoring the very people who built Canada's prosperity. They see resources choked, jobs lost, and communities abandoned, all while money flows east to subsidize Quebec and Ontario. The result? A collapse of trust. Western Canadians no longer believe that Ottawa represents them. They no longer feel that they're part of the same nation in spirit, even if they're still bound by law. The Quebec factor. And then comes the twist. Alberta is no longer standing alone in this rebellion. Quebec, long known for its separatist streak, is suddenly reaching out across the cultural divide. Two provinces with almost nothing in common, different languages, different histories. different politics are beginning to find common ground. Quebec separatist leaders are visiting Alberta, shaking hands with local politicians, and openly discussing how their movements might cooperate. The message is clear. Ottawa isn't just facing one province, threatening to walk away. It's facing two. That alliance may seem strange, even impossible, but it makes sense when you consider the driving force behind it, a deep mistrust of Ottawa's centralized power. Both Alberta and Quebec believe the federal government has failed to respect their autonomy, and together, they could present a challenge to Canadian unity unlike anything seen before. Beyond politics or revolt, here's what makes this moment so dangerous for Canada. It's not just politics. It's a revolt against the very structure of the country. Petitions are piling up. Court challenges are being filed. Panels are traveling across provinces to gather input from citizens. The legal system is being drawn into the debate. Even Indigenous nations in Alberta have secured standing in these discussions, making separation a matter not just of politics, but of law and governance. This means Ottawa can no longer dismiss it as a fringe tantrum. When premiers, courts, and Indigenous leaders are involved, it becomes mainstream, it becomes historic, and it becomes impossible to ignore the human side behind. The speeches and the headlines are ordinary people who feel abandoned, oil workers who lost their jobs, farmers suffocated by regulations, families forced to move south for opportunities. Many of them are asking a simple, gut-level question: why should we stay? Some are even looking south for inspiration. They compare Ottawa's leadership to leaders in the United States who fought for pipelines, energy independence, and jobs. To them, the contrast is staggering. They see weakness in Ottawa and strength across the border, and that comparison fuels the desire to break away. A nation at the edge, so here we are. A Canada where two of its most important provinces are openly questioning whether they should remain in the Federation. A Canada where anger isn't fading, it's spreading. A Canada where unity is not a given, but a question hanging by a thread. The West isn't asking for symbolic gestures anymore. They're demanding change. And if Ottawa doesn't deliver, separation may no longer be a distant threat. It may become reality. The question that brings us to the question that should haunt every Canadian leader right now. Is this the beginning of Canada's breakup? Or is it the last warning before the country falls apart? The answer depends not only on Ottawa's next moves, but on the will of the people in the West, because once trust is broken, once people stop believing in the promise of their country, it's almost impossible to glue the pieces back together. The cracks are here, the chasms are open, and Canada's future is more uncertain now than at any point in living memory. This is the breaking point of Canada's unity. The West is no longer asking politely. Quebec is no longer bluffing. Together, they are shaking the very foundation of Confederation. Petitions that could change a country. The most striking symbol of this rebellion isn't in speeches or headlines, it's on paper. Petitions are being circulated across Alberta that could lead to a referendum. These aren't symbolic petitions meant to send a message. Under Alberta's laws, if enough signatures are collected, the province must legally put the question to a vote. One petition asks directly, do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? That's as blunt as it gets. A yes vote would put Alberta on a path toward outright independence, of course. Before any ballot is cast, the courts must decide whether the question is constitutional. But even that process is part of the story. When courts are debating separation, when the legal system is weighing sovereignty, you know the issue has crossed from political theater into a real national crisis. A second petition, worded differently, asks whether Alberta should remain in Canada at all. Both petitions are circulating at the same time. And even though they approach the question from different angles, the effect is the same. They force Albertans to confront the idea of leaving Canada, not as an abstract notion, but as a concrete choice. Quebec steps onto Alberta soil while Alberta wrestles with its own identity. A surprising visitor arrives. The leader of Quebec's separatist party, Paul Pierre Plamondon, currently ahead in Quebec's polls, traveled to Alberta and spoke at the University of Calgary. He pledged that if he wins in Quebec's upcoming election, he will hold a referendum on independence during his very first term. Now, imagine the symbolism. A Quebec nationalist speaking in Alberta, shaking hands, discussing strategy, and exploring ways their provinces could coordinate on the road to independence. Two very different cultures, French-speaking Quebecois, and English-speaking Albertans suddenly realizing they share a common enemy, Ottawa. This isn't just politics. This is history unfolding. When provinces that have almost nothing in common begin to form alliances, it means the gravitational pull away from Confederation is stronger than anyone imagined. Ottawa's miscalculations. So how did it come to this? How did Canada's leadership allow two of its most important provinces to drift toward the exits at the same time? For Alberta, the answer is energy. Pipelines blocked. Oil and gas projects suffocated. Investments driven south to the United States. Thousands of jobs gone. Families uprooted. Towns hollowed out. And all of this happening while Ottawa imposed higher taxes and stricter climate rules. To Albertans, it feels like betrayal. For Quebec, the issue is cultural autonomy. For decades, Quebec has fought to preserve its language, its traditions, and its political independence. Ottawa's heavy hand on issues ranging from immigration to finances only reinforce the sense that Quebec must chart its own path in both provinces. Instead of uniting the country, federal policies have driven provinces into each other's arms, creating an alliance that could one day tear Canada apart, a federation or a prison. At the heart of this crisis lies a deeper question. What is Canada supposed to be? A federation built on mutual respect, or a prison where Ottawa dictates and provinces obey? For many in the West, Canada feels more like the latter. They see billions of their tax dollars transferred to Quebec and Ontario, while their own industries are stifled. The grievances are different, but the conclusion is the same. Ottawa cannot be trusted. The West isn't just protesting, it's planning an escape. Indigenous voices enter the debate and overlooked. But critical piece of this story is the role of Indigenous nations. In Alberta, several Indigenous groups have secured legal standing in the sovereignty discussions. This changes everything. Why? Because separation isn't just a political question anymore. It's also a legal one involving land, treaties, and rights. They see a prime minister and a central government that prioritize global applause over local prosperity. They see communities suffering while Ottawa talks about green energy dreams that ignore current realities. And when people feel trapped, when they feel exploited, they eventually look for a way out. That's what's happening now. Fear that their voices will never matter, no matter how loudly they shout. It could mean freedom from Ottawa's chokehold. Hope that Alberta could chart its own course, harness its own resources, and build prosperity on its own terms. Indigenous voices bring weight, legitimacy, and complexity to the debate. Ottawa can no longer dismiss the sovereignty movement as a loud minority. When First Nations enter the conversation, separation becomes not just possible, but historic. Fear and hope for ordinary people. The conversation about sovereignty isn't just about politics. It's about fear and hope. Fear that staying in Canada means endless taxes, collapsing industries, and lost futures. Fear that the country they once loved is slipping away, piece by piece. But also hope. Hope that Quebec could preserve its culture and identity without interference. This is why the movement isn't fading. Because it's not just anger, it's also aspiration. And aspiration is a powerful force. Ottawa's dangerous. Gamble. The most dangerous thing Ottawa can do now is pretend this isn't happening. And yet, that seems to be the current strategy. Downplay the movement, dismiss the petitions, mock the leaders, and tighten control even further. But history shows that when governments ignore rising discontent, they don't preserve unity, they accelerate collapse. Every new tax, every blocked project, every arrogant lecture from Ottawa pushes more people toward the sovereignty camp. If Canada's leaders think they can simply ride out this storm, they are gravely mistaken. The storm is not passing. It is growing, the point of no returns. So where does this end? There are only two paths left. Path 1, Ottawa changes course. It listens. It respects provincial autonomy. It unblocks energy projects, cuts red tape, and treats the West and Quebec as equal partners in Confederation. This path requires humility, compromise, and a genuine shift in priorities. Path 2. Ottawa refuses to change. The petitions gain signatures. The courts allow the referendum questions. Alberta and Quebec vote on their futures. And once that door opens, Canada may never close it again. Because here's the truth. Once people begin to imagine life outside a union, once they begin to see independence not as impossible, but as achievable, the bond is already broken. Even if referendums fail the first time, the idea doesn't die. It grows. it returns. And eventually, it wins. The unthinkable becomes inevitable. What was once unthinkable Canada breaking apart might now openly discussed at kitchen tables, in town halls, and in provincial legislatures. That alone is historic. A country cannot survive on nostalgia alone. It must earn the loyalty of its people every single day. And right now, Ottawa is failing that test. The West is restless. Quebec is bold. Indigenous voices are stepping in. Courts are being drawn into the battle. And Canadians across the country are forced to ask, what kind of nation are we? The answer to that question will decide whether Canada survives the century as one country or fractures into pieces. Final questions. So, here's the final question for you to consider. If the petitions succeed, if referendums are held, and if provinces actually vote to leave, will Ottawa fight to keep them, or will it let them go? Because history shows us one thing clearly: nations don't fall apart all at once. They fall apart piece by piece, province by province. Trust erodes and people lose faith. And Canada right now is walking dangerously close to that edge.